Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is Hua. I'm happy to be here. I hope that those of you in Minnesota are well and safe. I saw the videos and the photos of the storm. I hope that there wasn't too much damage done to your properties. Thank you for tuning in. This is my Halloween Horror Fest, and yes, I am starting earlier this year. If you have a story or an experience that you'd like me to tell and share, please submit it to my email listed below. This story is called Broken Promises, and this is a mixture of fact and fiction put together for entertainment. I hope that you will enjoy this story. Mlong ta ni ke chỉ sai keng chỉ sunshine mà. Back in Laos, where the air was thick with fog from the mountains and during the monsoon season, where the water flowed through the villages, I had fallen in love with a young woman named Paj Maiv. She was a town village beauty, and everyone who was anyone knew who she was. She was well respected as a woman to be a bride, and her voice of Gutsia was a majestic one that even the birds stopped to listen. I was an orphan boy who grew up with my uncle and aunt, and although they never let me go hungry, I was loved second best when it came to their own children. But I appreciated them for what they could give me and was grateful. I spent a large amount of time in the garden shed by myself, even though Uncle had 4 boys around my age. He didn't have any daughters, and he broke the marriage vows because of this. But because I was just a kid, I never thought to argue against anything he did. The summer that changed my life, I had been watching Paj Maiv from afar, admiring her beauty and demeanor for a while, but I had no courage to pursue her. On that fateful day, I was chopping wood in the forest when I heard a blood-curdling scream. I had just turned around with an axe in hand when through the broken trees and overgrown weeds, Paj Maiv came running with a broken and terrified emotion on her face. Behind her were my uncle's 4 sons chasing her. She saw me and ran straight into my arms, her voice rasping from screaming and her fingernails dug into my flesh. "Please, help me! I'm being chased by a pack of men!" she cried. My cousins all stopped before me, their big, broad shoulders heaving from running. Their faces were all loud enough for me to guess what they had planned on doing with her. It disgusted me, and my older cousin stepped forward with an eerie grin on his face. "Dumbi, brother, hand her over and we'll be on our way." This was when Paj Maiv turned to glance at me with shock and realized that I knew these men. She began shaking her head and tried to run from me when I reached out and grabbed her hand, steadying her. The gesture made my cousins smile, but what I said next left them in anger. "How embarrassing to be known as your brother with the disgusting thing you planned on doing to her. Are you even a real man?" I asked. He laughed and crossed his arms, showing me just how big and burly he was. "Look, just hand her over and we'll go our way. If you create a problem, we'll just get rid of you. There's 4 of us and only 1 of you." You know these men?" came Paj Maiv's trembling voice. My cousin leaned forward and smiled at her like she was a child. "He's our little brother." "Not by choice," I answered quickly. "Get out of here, Sai, and take your pack of wolves with you. If your father found out what you wanted to do, he would disown you." I wasn't expecting Sai to jump at me, and he managed to strike my chin with his fist, but I regained control and swung my axe at his head, stopping just a hair away from beheading him. "Get out of here, or I will remove your head and bring back your lifeless body with no regret." Sai laughed and pointed a finger at me. "You're gonna get it, Dumbi. You just watch. You're dead." He turned, and his brothers and him walked away. When I turned back to look at Paj Maiv, her face had gone white, and she was shivering. I removed my shirt and put it around her shoulders, and then stepped back to give her room to breathe. "I'm so sorry. They are my cousins, but it doesn't mean I'm like them. She wiped at her eyes and let out a deep breath. Thank you. What is your name again? You can call me Tumbi. I know exactly who you are, I interrupted. Everyone knows who you are, actually. It's hard not to when you are talked amongst the town. She lowered her eyes and turned away from me. I'm no one, really, but people seem to think my life is wonderful based on what I look like. If people only knew. I detected a hint of sadness, and I reached out to tap her shoulder to make her look up at me. I'm sure that whatever you're going through, it can't be as bad as me, right? I mean, here I am, orphan boy with no one to stand up for him. I've learned to be on my own since I was young. You got parents, so I'm sure you're well protected. A ghost of a smile appeared and quickly faded as she replied, That's what everyone thinks, isn't it? That because we have parents, we must be well protected. She stopped, and then she lowered her face and whispered, What if it was the parents causing the pain? But before I could ask her to repeat what she had said, she looked up at me and shook her head. Thank you for helping me. She removed my shirt and gave it back to me. I'll be on my way. But do you mind if I walk with you? Just as a precaution. It's quite thick here with woods, and I'd hate to think that I let you go alone after what just happened. Nodding, she replied, I'd love that, Tumbi. That was how I met her for the first time. I remembered walking her home and standing beside her, close enough to touch her arm, but far enough to make it seem as if we were not a couple. The very near presence of her made my heart race with a feeling that I didn't know how to control. She was the type of beauty that the more you looked at her, the more timeless she became. She didn't speak to me during that walk home, and I was sure she was just as afraid of me as I was afraid of her thinking the worst of me. When we made it back onto the roads to go home, and the forest began to fall behind us, the village huts appearing up ahead, she turned to me and gave me the most incredible smile. And then she simply waved at me as a parting farewell and took off running toward the huts that stood in a row. I returned to the garden shed where I listened to the rain that came down hard and heavy that day, almost drowning me in its wrath. I woke up to something touching my thigh in the middle of the night. The air had cooled to a chill and the fire had died down. When I shifted and opened my eyes, I could make out what looked like a figure beside me. The ray of the moon told me it was a young woman, and the long black hair that shielded her face was becoming visible as my eyes adjusted to the night vision. Tumbi, the voice came, and it told me it was Paj Maiv sitting beside me. The hand on my thigh hiked up higher and rested just below my navel. Tumbi, Paj Maiv, what are you doing here? It's so late. I wanted to thank you properly for what you did today. As her hand reached up, I took a hold of it and stopped her. Paj Maiv, it's not necessary. You misunderstood me. You don't need to do this. Her voice came almost like a whisper. You don't want me? Trust me, Paj Maiv, you have no idea how much I want you. But not like this. Not this way. I respect you. I don't want you to hate me when morning comes. I am not like most men. You don't have to do this to get me to stay with you. But I'm an orphan, and I don't want anything to be slapped against me. I'd lose in the court of justice since I don't have anyone to stand up for me. You should go home. A soft giggle came from her, and then suddenly I felt her lips against my ear. But I already chose you. I jerked awake from the nightmare, and it's morning. The birds are singing and the world is awakening. I walked down to the stream and washed up before coming back to harvest the rice. For as long as I had remembered, this was my job, harvesting the rice. My cousins never helped, and my uncle and aunt never pushed them to. But at the end of the year, they were the ones who received the new clothes and the first batch of new rice cakes. I had what was left over, and because I had no one to cry to, I just swallowed up what was being forced upon me. I worked in the field until the sun was high, and when I took a break to eat lunch, I noticed that Paj Maiv was sitting at my garden house cooking. I was surprised because I didn't even know she was aware of where I was. Last night's nightmare bothered me a bit, but I pushed it aside as I walked to greet her. Paj Maiv, I didn't know you knew where I was. She looked up at me, and I noticed that she looked a bit pale. The life was gone from her eyes, and the smile she gave me looked forced. Are you okay? Nodding, she replied, Yes, I am. I'm just a bit tired. Come on, I made you some lunch. I took a seat beside her and noticed that she had cooked some boiled green as broth, and beside her were 2 large banana leaves filled with rice and a whole boiled chicken. She tore off one of the chicken legs, added some rice helpings on a leaf, and handed it to me. My heart sunk, as I had never been given this before, and my eyes shined with tears as I thanked her quietly and began to eat. I tasted that the rice was a bit sour, and when I bit into the flesh of the chicken, I noticed some liquid was oozing out blood. Without wanting to embarrass her, I ate it without hesitation, but she didn't eat with me. Why are you not eating? I asked. I already ate at home, she replied in a low voice. I'll be here to cook food for you again tomorrow. I have to go now. Stay with me longer. She gave me a quick smile. I'll return soon, Tumbi. She picked up her bamboo basket, and I watched her walk until she disappeared into the thatch of forest trees. I spat out the sour rice and uncooked flesh of chicken, and realized the rice had been colored a deep crimson shade from the mixture of raw meat. I had assumed that Paj Maiv knew how to cook, but I supposed she did not. As hungry as I was, I took everything she cooked and tossed it away where she wouldn't be able to see it, and then I went back to harvest the rice until sundown. That night, I woke to the sound of someone consuming food like it was the end of the world for them. The sound was loud enough that it disturbed me, and luckily, the fire I had kept going hadn't died down. As I shifted in bed, I turned to find that where I had tossed the uncooked and sour rice, something was leaning over the batch of food, eating it with long claws. It was eating and making loud grunting noises. Who is that? I asked loudly. I heard a squeal like a pig that had been gutted, and I saw the figure begin to run on all fours toward the trees. All I could see was long black hair flicking in the lights that the moon hit. My heart began to pound and race as I took a torch from the fire and aimed it at where it was earlier. Whatever it was had eaten the badly discarded food, leaving only bloody bones of the chicken. A deep, unsettling feeling fell deep into the pit of my stomach as I stayed awake until the morning hours. Shortly in the afternoon, I looked up from the garden to find Paj Maiv sitting at my garden shed. I quickly walked over and saw that she had the same food spread out before us. Today her hair looked thin and sparse, as if she had been losing strands. She gave me a strange smile as I sat down before her. Paj Maiv, are you okay? You look pale. Are you not feeling well? I asked. Smiling, she replied, I'm okay, Tumbi. I consumed some bad food last night and I was up all night throwing up. But today I am better. Oh, was all I said. She handed me some helpings, and as I took in the food, I noticed the same sour rice and uncooked chicken flesh. I let the food swim around my mouth, hoping she'd leave, but this time she didn't. Make sure you eat it all. I noticed that you didn't eat your lunch from yesterday. You know, that hurt me a bit, she said. I gave her a nervous laugh as I forced myself to swallow down the food. Thank you for cooking for me. I took another bite, and this time when I looked up at her, she gave me an eerie smile that left me shaking. She cocked her head to the side and giggled. Tumbi, do you like me? Sure, I replied a bit uncertain. Then I shall stay with you tonight and not go home. I'll be your bride. Do you think your aunt will like me as your wife? I set down the food and gave her a nervous laugh. We hardly know each other. I am not sure your parents would like you to marry an orphan. It sounds like you are rejecting me. I shook my head. No. I'm just worried, that's all. I don't have any money, and I can't afford a wife right now. Don't you see the state that I'm in? You'd be suffering right with me. She leaned in forward and whispered, Then you have to promise me that you will never marry anyone but me. Promise me, Tumbi. Promise me. I smiled and told her, I promise you. The smile she gave me left my heart pounding in fear, but she got up and left without saying a single word. As soon as she was gone, I turned to the side and began to vomit what I had consumed. I threw the food away in the same location as the earlier one, and later that night, I heard the same grunting sound as I woke up to something feeding on the food. When I grabbed the torch and turned the light toward the sound, I caught sight of half a woman's face as she ran on all fours out back into the woods. What frightened me was that I recognized that face as none other than Paj Maiv's. The path home seemed long today as I decided to visit home and figure out what was going on. I had Paj Maiv who visited me 2 days in a row, and at night was what haunted me with fear during the day. As I neared the town village, I could hear the sound of qing and drums playing. These signified only death, and they were coming from the direction of Paj Maiv's home. As I neared my uncle's house, I saw my 4 cousins standing with their arms crossed, their faces written with disgust. What was going on? Right as I reached them and opened my mouth to ask what was going on, a blood-curdling scream came from the back of the village. People began running past me, and I followed to find Paj Maiv's mother pointing to something. I followed her gaze, and to my surprise, my body was lying on the ground holding a bloody half-eaten chicken. I stumbled backward, hitting something behind me, and I turned around to find a pale-faced Paj Maiv smiling at me.
Tumbi, finally you've returned. Now I can go home with you and be your bride, just as you promised.
I shook my head and began backing up as she came closer to me, and she began shifting herself to her true form. The ghastly tongue that hung loosely with teeth that had been punched broken, the blood that seeped through open wounds with maggots crawling through her face, and the thin, sparse hair that kept falling in shreds. She reached out a hand with a few broken nails and a broken pinky finger that took the shape of an S. What's going on? I asked as I didn't understand what was going on around me. What happened?
You broke your promise.
Paj Maiv whispered as she came toward me.
You promised me that you would never marry anyone but me. You lied to me! You lied to me!
And in that fleeting moment, my memories came rushing back to me from the very beginning of when we first met, and as I walked her home, I took her maiden body and promised her I would marry her. I told her to pack a lunch of chicken and rice and to wait for me in my garden shed, and I would come to bring her home with me. Yet, when I returned to my uncle and aunt, the town leader's daughter came back from school, a beautiful woman, all grown up, and she took my very heart away from me, and I left Paj Maiv waiting for me at the garden shed. I remembered when she came to search for me and found me sitting with someone else, and we had fought. She chased me to the garden shed and shoved the overdue chicken and rice to my face, where we tussled and fought until my hands took her throat and began choking her. I watched as her eyes bulged up and the veins nearly exploded on her face, and then she gave me a smile and she whispered, "You promised me," and leaned forward, biting my lip with her teeth. When I screamed, she took my whole tongue into her mouth and ripped it out from my throat. When the memories faded into small, tiny lights in the back of my mind, I watched as Paj Maiv stood before me with tears in her eyes and holding yet still the pack of lunch for me.
You promised me.
Thank you for listening. Nông ta này kể chỉ sa chén chỉ san trái nè mà. Mình trong mình pli nhắm bóp mình ba mi kể.